to release some prisoners early in a bid to relieve pressure on the justice system as part of similar proposals to those introduced by the Conservatives.
It comes as the number of inmates at prisons in England and Wales rises to more than 87,000. The majority of those, more than 83,000, are men.
What is understood is that a minimum of 1,425 spaces must be free, available at any one time for the justice system to operate effectively. However, recent figures suggest that there are actually less than half that number, just 700 prison places vacant.
Let's meet now to Mark Fairhurst, who's the chair of the Prison Officers Association. Very good morning.
Morning.
In a snapshot, and we had some of the statistics there, as we speak on a Friday morning, do you know how many places there are in prison available right now?
In the adult closed male estate, we've got less than 700. Now, we reach a critical point at 300 when we inform the police that we need to start using their cells. So this is a mess that's been inherited by a new government, and we want them to take steps to reduce the pressure on us and reduce the prison population.
Can I ask a stupid question? If you've still got 300 free, why is it a critical point?
Because we can't operate on that amount of cell space. When you look at the courts, they're sending people to us at the rate of 250 to 350 per week. If we've got less than 300, we just haven't got the capacity.
So, in order to increase that capacity, it is reported, speculated, that this government will reduce the amount of time spent in prison by certain prisoners, and we can go into detail in a moment, to 40% and before release. What difference will that make in terms of numbers?
I would think it's going to take a couple of months, if that's correct. It's going to take a couple of months to identify people and process them so we can release them early. I would think in the immediate term, it would give us about 4,500 to 5,500 additional spaces.
And how much grace in terms of how long will that last? I mean, it gives you those spaces, but how long? There's still 250 to 300, as you said, going into prison each week.
I would think initially it would give us between 12 and 18 months grace. It would relieve the pressure on us for a maximum of 18 months, and then longer term, the new governments have to look at further measures.
Can I ask you a little bit about the mechanics of the release program? If prisoners are to be released earlier, how does that happen? Does the prison service have to? Presumably, you have to do the maths, do you? I mean, it comes down to literally a calculation. How long have people been in? Do the prisoners able to apply? Do they say it's time? How does it work in practice?
So we would have people working in the offender management unit who would recalculate people's sentences, apart from those who are going to be exempt. And then we would go to the prisoner and say, you're eligible for release immediately, or you're eligible for release at some point in the future.
I'm thinking, that sounds like a lot of work to do. A new burden where you've got to recalculate things. You presumably had calculations in place. That's all going to be redone. That sounds like, in itself, just sounds like a lot of administration, even leaving aside the issue of physically, the process of having people leave prison, that which must in itself be extra work.
It is. It's a massive job. And when you think that those departments in prisons are fairly small, that's why it's going to take a couple of months to identify and recalculate. And then, are we putting extra pressure on an underfunded and understaffed probation service who have to supervise early releases on licence?
Does it work, being released on licence?
It does, if we've got support services in place for prisoners. And one of the most important
today,
things...
does it work?
Yes, it does, as long as we've got accommodation for them to go to and the support services in place to deal with their needs, mental health needs, addiction needs. We've got to have that in place.
Well, there will be a question. There will be lots of people who just go, you got given a prison sentence, now you only serve half of it. Okay, now you're only serving 40% of it. In terms of rehabilitation, all those questions about what actually happens to a prisoner in prison, whether they get the rehabilitation they need in order to re-enter society, there's even less time for that. And the reason I ask if it works is because there are still questions about whether they're being rehabilitated in crowded prisons, understaffed often, at this very moment in time.
In the majority of adult closed male estate prisons, we're just human warehouses. Now, in the open estate, we do a really good job of reintegrating.
What's a human warehouse?
A human warehouse is they get banged up in a prison. We can't do nothing with them if they're overcrowded. So if you think of a prison like Wandsworth, only supposed to hold 900, is holding 1,600. You can imagine the pressure on all those support services inside the prison. We can't do much in forms of regime and rehabilitation if we're overcrowded.
So is it more dangerous?
Of course it is.
Releasing them with just 40%. I mean, that's what people, you know, after 40% of their sentence. Because if the job isn't being done now, and you cited Wandsworth, is it more dangerous?
Well, we would hope it wouldn't be, but what is more dangerous to the public is if we don't act. So if we're clogging up police cells, they're unable to arrest people because there's nowhere for them to go. So that's a more danger to the public. What we're doing is we're releasing people early who are going to get released anyway at some point. What we've got to do is we've got to try our best in prison to provide a constructive regime and a purposeful regime, and we can't do that because the pressure is so great.
Can I ask you just one practical question? Your engagements with the new government, have you had meetings yet? Have you got dates in the diary at your organisation?
We're having a meeting next week at some point with the new Justice Secretary and the new Prisons Minister. We previously had a meeting before the general election with Shabana Mahmood, and we made our position clear, and we, you know, highlighted to her what our priorities are.
Okay.
Sorry, just to be clear, because I do want this, those who are going to be released, there will be concerns about what types of prisoner are going to be released. Can you just clarify what you understand in terms of those ones who will be released after 40% of their time
I would imagine it's similar to what the early release scheme is, and there are certain offences that will be not eligible for release, and they will be sex offences, lifers, violent crime over 4 years, domestic violence, stalkers, those who breach an harassment order, things like that. But in all of this, I just have to say, in the future, when we start to reform sentencing, we must speak with victims. So often the victims of crime are the forgotten voice. Let's engage with them, and let's make sure they think that justice has been served.
Thank you very much for your time this morning, Mark Fairhurst. And Mark Fairhurst is the chair of the Prison Officers Association.
Thank you.